Hey guys, welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Landon.
I'm Kason.
Today we're going to be talking about the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Nintendo Direct, and then we have a bunch of really great topics from you guys, from the viewers. The first one is from Anders Bod Mai. He asks, from someone who hasn't played Final Fantasy VII yet, what would you guys recommend? Should I play the old version or wait for the remake? We got Yuns of Provo, video game villain that you agree with their motivations and actions. Try to think if you would make the same decisions as they did regarding their motives. Captain Awesome asks, what makes a boss fight memorable or enjoyable? And what were some of the most memorable, enjoyable ones for you? Chris Ewan, what is the difference between things that pull you out of a game world versus gaming conventions you just accept? For me, it feels random. For example, I hate quick travel in Skyrim and scorecards at the end of levels or combat in games. That should feel urgent. But it doesn't bother me that rabbits drop money in Final Fantasy VI or that landscapes always end in cliffs falling off into oblivion. What do you think? Okay. Press start to play. Thanks to the power of hindsight, games that were criticized at launch have later been looked back on as great games. Wind Waker springs to mind, most notably, and for some people even Final Fantasy XIII. Do you think once all the content has been released for Final Fantasy XV, and it's in a complete state, or as complete as they can make it, will people forget about its rocky launch and hold it in high regard? Okay. All right, so Xenoblade 2. I've already voiced in the past some of my reservations about the game. This Nintendo Direct was about 16 minutes long, detailed a little bit more into the world and some of the characters you can see. One thing they did announce that was super cool is Japanese voice acting with English subtitles if you want. There's an option for that for the Western localized releases. So that's really cool. So the entire thing was in Japanese. They didn't have any English in it. And they sort of, it was kind of weird, the person narrating. By the way, I don't know if you guys caught this. For those of you who played Rogue Squadron back in the day, there was a narrator who would read like the briefing, like the mission briefings as you'd like come up to them. And like explain sort of like in a synopsis, like what the level was going to be about. That freaking dude was the one doing the narration for this trailer. I was like, holy crap, I've not heard that guy's voice in a long time. A long time.
What if they're going to put it in the game?
That'd be sick if they put it in the game. Like, his voice is iconic. It's just like, I cannot separate it from those little, like, hologram, twitchy little, synopses before the levels in Rogue.
Like rotating around it.
Yeah, exactly. Totally his voice. Anyways, so yeah, it's cool that they're going to have allow us to be able to put the Japanese track on if we want. I guess
that's awesome.
Could do that. You could do that in the first Xenoblade too, so it's not necessarily something new, but it's always nice to have that option. Additionally, they showed off a ton of mechanics. I mean, just like really went through and detailed a lot of how the systems worked, and I feel like from watching it that it's cool that they're deviating in a lot of ways from like the arts palette that they used to have, which was kind of like just, you know, like a horizontal sort of like line at the bottom where you'd kind of cycle right to left through your different abilities and just sort of, and then they'd have like a cool off where you have to wait for them to rebuild again and then use them. Now they've kind of mapped them all to the face buttons instead. And the entire idea they have going on with the blades, so you have these artificial intelligences is what it seems to be, these blades in each character. So there's 3 characters in the party. Each one of those characters can have 3 blades. So it's like, and then technically the main guy can have like 4 because the main, I don't know her name, Pyra, the girl in red, she has a different form. So like her as a blade is like basically 2 different blades. So anyways, there's like 3 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's like 10 sort of like different, I don't know what to call it.
They're like classes, right?
I don't know if it's a class, but yeah, it's kind of the word I was thinking of. But like there's all these different combinations, I guess, that you can do between these different blades with different characters. And each of them, you know, you can build affinity with and like unlock a ton of different abilities with each of those blades. And so like the way they do affinity in the game and, you know, like the heart-to-heart moments with the characters, the idea of being like on the giant beasts, people live on these, you know, giant titans and beasts. A lot of things are very similar to previous Xenoblade games, or the first Xenoblade Chronicles, I should say. But they're definitely deviating in a lot of ways in terms of battle mechanics and systems and stuff like that. And so it was kind of a lot of information to swallow. I don't remember all of it. I'd have to watch it probably a couple more times to really like get a handle on everything they're showing there. But I'm kind of leaving that for later because I want to just, you know, get my hands on it and play it and figure it out. But it was pretty intriguing. I think that as far as that goes, it excited me a little bit more. I still don't like the art direction. I don't like the art style. And even with a lot of what they're showing in terms of the dialogue, like the writing in it and like the way they're portraying characters, I feel like they're really veering into like common, like modern day popular anime tropes with that. And that has me a little bit concerned that it's going to feel very generic and not very inspired on the storytelling side of things. But that remains to be seen. Now, I think I've talked about this in the past, not liking the art style like a ton in it, because I feel like if you see the art books and like the concept art for the original Xenoblade Chronicles, I've never seen an art style like that in anything else. I still have these images as like desktop backgrounds that cycle on my desktop on my computer. It's just like extremely striking imagery where it's like you see that and it's like that's Xenoblade, like you immediately, just from like the sense of style, the artist's style. And when I look at the characters in Xenoblade 2, I feel like they're really derivative of other kinds of anime. And I don't know. The writing, like, and especially English voice acting too, from like past trailers. I know people have debated a lot about that, but I mean, it's cool that you can turn the Japanese on instead.
Yeah, that helps alleviate it a lot.
I'll probably do that for sure. But did you guys hear? So you saw the last trailer, right? The one where the narrator is like the.
Yeah, and they're going over all the massive, like, colossal islands, basically, like living islands.
The different nations.
Yeah, we saw them.
Yeah. So like they show like all the different sigils of like the different nations. They sort of explain a little bit. I liked that a lot. But then,
pretty cool concept.
Halfway through, the narrator changes from like a generic narrator to the character, the Titan beast thing that the main character sort of rides on.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people were complaining about his voice actor in the English version being like really strange, but the Japanese guy is like way crazy, like way obnoxious voice, like high pitched, just like crazy sounding voice.
Wow.
So yeah, it's cool that we'll get the Japanese version. But even in the first game too, Dunban's English voice actor had kind of like a low voice, like a strong masculine sort of voice. The British actor that portrayed him, and then in the Japanese, he had this really high pitch. It was so different. It's kind of like Goku in Dragon Ball Z. Have you ever heard him in Japanese before?
Mm-hmm. I don't think I've heard him in Japanese.
What the fetch, dude? You should look it up because it's like not even the same guy. It like totally changes like the, I want to say, character of the character, but that's kind of weird to say. Right? But it gives a very different impression of the character for me. And so it was kind of the same thing going on with this voice actor in Japanese for Dunban and then for this new character in the new Xenoblade 2. But I don't know. I don't know how much you guys have seen from it or whatever, but I just feel...
I missed the direct this morning.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm reserved big time about like what they're doing with the style and the storytelling here.
Yeah. I've seen... I did not watch this last direct, but I watched all of them. There have only been like 2 for this game, I think. But
But I saw a lot of people sharing crap today on Twitter, and actually an interesting thing happened. You know, people share an image and it's small and you can click on it and make it bigger, right? This is how the internet works. Any questions you can ask me. I'll tell you about it. But I saw something that was essentially like thumbnail because it was small, and I thought it was like a hand done work of art, like a painting or something. And I blew it up, and it was like a still from one of the towns in the game. And I was like, dang, holy crap. Like as a thumbnail, like it looked really good and convincing to me. And it made it bigger, and I didn't not like it anymore. I haven't had a strong opinion about the art direction one way or another, but
right.
But that kind of took me back. I was like, okay, like I think there's something there. Maybe it's something to get used to, or I don't know. And I know there's people that don't want to get used to this kind of art. It definitely strikes the like what anime has looked like kind of since the mid 2000s, right?
Totally.
It's like,
it kind of reminds me a bit of the Tales of series a bit.
Tales, yeah, that's true.
And particularly Tales of Fantasia, because that's the one that I got into a bit. But yeah, very, I don't know, very interesting. It almost looks like it belongs like in the 2000s. It makes it look older.
It does. Well, you know, in some ways it does. In some ways it's like they're trying to be like inoffensive. Like not like.
Well, that's what Mike's saying about how it ends up coming across as uninspired because they're just trying to cross such a broad...
just something that like, hey, Americans and Japanese will like this.
Yeah.
But to me, it's more an issue of does it match the tone of whatever story they're telling.
Yeah.
Something that has struck me from what I've seen in this game so far is it because they're going with a bunch of different artists for the blades. Not every blade has a different artist, but there are a lot of artists that are designing blades. And that is what they do in games like Fire Emblem Heroes or Puzzle and Dragons. They'll commission an artist to create, you know, stuff and it'll feel like that artist's thing, and that's part of the appeal is like we've got some new characters that look like this guy made them. I find it unusual to do that in a game like this, overtly being like we have this part. It feels like a thing that's normally in free to play gacha driven games, not something you usually see in games like this where it's like
you have a lot of guest artists.
Yeah, exactly, and their art styles coming through and almost overriding
the art direction.
The art direction.
Yeah, that's true. I see. I
to where,
what you mean.
Yeah, like if you could imagine,
it feels cheaper in that sense.
Yeah, like if, and it's not like this has never been done before. Sometimes it's like, well, one guy, because they were talking about that from the very beginning. Tetsuya Nomura designing some people for the game, but. I don't think saying that one guy designed this guy is unusual, but I do think it's unusual to see a lot of characters that carry strong design cues from not the rest of the game. And I guess it because like in the Persona games or in the Shin Megami Tensei games, you've got all these different, you know, like demons or whatever that you can summon, right? Personas. But they all still, while they have different like design like motifs about them, about that kind of correspond to like what their powers are, they still look like they're all designed by the same group of people. And like same with Pokemon, right? Like you don't get like one Pokemon that looks like freaking like a Toriyama, like a Dragon Ball Z style Pokemon, while the rest of the Pokemon look like your standard Pokemon Company designs.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just think that's a little unusual to me. I'm not like opposed to it, but I do find it kind of strange, and I wonder how it'll feel in the flow of the game. Although, I was going to say, it might make sense because you're like summoning these things in from like wherever.
All right, so this is how things look in this other dimension.
I don't know.
It's just how they look.
But to kind of, I'll share another link with you guys here to kind of bring my point home about the art style. Like, if you look at the one in the center is Xenoblade Chronicles X. I'll put this up on the screen too. And that's actually the character model, so that's not a concept art, so I don't think that that's like exactly an apples to apples comparison. But it's Shulk on the left side here versus
that's
Rex
like a concept
on the right
art
side
Shulk.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and,
it's
and
pretty
to
different.
me, it's like, what the heck, dude? Like the one on the left, it's not
It
not
looks
just
like
about
Gundam Seed on the one on the far right.
exactly. It looks like something that you know already, right?
Yeah.
It's not that it's just about preferring one over the other. That's not like it, because you know the art style is whatever it is. To me, it's about uniqueness and trying something different than what other JRPGs were doing at the time, which is what Xenoblade Chronicles, the original game, really represented to me. Like, JRPGs were kind of struggling at the time that game came out. They were losing popularity. A lot of them were really bad. Not to say that there weren't any good ones.
Yeah.
But they were struggling at the time. And that game sort of came in and did something way different than other JRPGs were doing. And its art style, among everything else, sort of represented this just totally unique experience. I have not seen other anime with an art style quite like that one. The one on the right, I see tons of anime with that art style or something that looks very, very similar to it.
Those pants
said.
actually look like Eiko Carroll's pants, like his outfit from Final Fantasy IX.
Oh. Pants over pants.
Where it's these like
You got like chaps.
well, chaps, but like the parachute chaps.
The parachute chaps.
And then you have like shorts underneath, so it just looks so weird.
Huh.
Look up Eiko.
And
you see it.
even beyond this, though, it's like I'm watching some of the event scenes from this trailer they released today, and it's like there's a beat or a way characters talk back and forth to each other. There's like the kind of dialogue you see, like in a lot of Japanese trailers for these kinds of stories. They're yelling a lot, and they have a certain kind of inflection. Like so much of it feels samey or derivative of other, very popular anime.
So are you saying this is the Sword Art Online of the Xenoblade?
Yeah,
series?
that's pretty much what I'm saying. Is that I'm afraid that Xenoblade is losing its uniqueness in the pursuit of playing into what they know is popular in Japan, and that has me concerned about it.
I suppose that's one way to look at it. Just play devil's advocate. It's possible they're just trying to do something completely different every time. And so maybe with the follow-up to this, won't still continue this trajectory. I don't know.
That would be interesting to see what they do after this.
I will say, though, I have never, just talking about the design for those past 3 games, I've never been a fan of the character designs from Xenoblade Chronicles X.
Oh, from X?
They just looked, and there's probably a reason why, but they just looked, I don't know, like dolls to me.
I kind of agree with that, actually.
And I think there's probably a reason why, but
well, I guess, but that doesn't really excuse bland. That doesn't excuse bland design. I think you're right, though. I think I actually agree with that, because the original Xenoblade Chronicles, it was like they had a similar style to that for X, but there was like a certain level of blandness in it.
Yeah, like the skin textures, or I don't know what it was, but.
But I agree with you. I think that maybe that could be also part of the reason why they've gone sort of this radical sort of like change in direction with this one. It's like maybe they felt like they received feedback that these characters look very bland, so they wanted to really cartoonize it a bit more and make them stand out and be more colorful. Yeah, and they've definitely done that. And go ahead.
Who's the art director for this game? Is it a different person?
It's a different person. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, totally different guy. But I don't know. I definitely look at certain screenshots, kind of like you were saying, where you looked at it and you were like, "Whoa, that looks awesome" in the thumbnail or whatever. There are certain screenshots I've seen, especially in darker images, like at nighttime or whatever, going through towns. I think that they've done a really excellent job with putting style aside, like the way they blend the characters into the backgrounds. Like everything feels really, really good. Like I would say the execution of this art style, because you'll see an art style, a concept art, and then you see what that looks like in the actual game. It's like, what the fetch?
Yeah, sometimes it's not as cool.
That doesn't look anything like what you were envisioning. Yeah. And here, I feel like they nailed it. I feel like they really executed that art style perfectly and brought it to life. in a way that is like almost a one-to-one comparison. So like that's really great, and there are a lot of shots I've seen that look really beautiful. It's just I just feel like the choices sort of indicate this like trend towards safety rather than towards like continuing to try and be unique.
Okay, so then I was going to say, does the art style concern you that the story is not going to try and take risks? Is that kind of
yes?
What you're feeling?
I feel like the whole direction in everything, aside from battle mechanics, because that's where they're making some changes and they're really trying something different. But I feel like with the story and the characters and that sort of thing, all of like the, I guess like artistic aspects of the game feel like they're trying to be safe and do what they know people in Japan like a lot already and what's popular there versus like taking risks on that side of things. And I have a feeling that it's going to be bland in comparison at best, and then at worst being obviously like, I don't know, these people, you know. Anyways, I don't want to speculate too much on it, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm not excited to play it or that I'm not going to give it a fair chance. It's just that every time I see something for it, I'm not like... Because I remember seeing the trailers for the first Xenoblade Chronicles, and that felt so refreshing in the landscape of JRPGs at the time. It was like, whoa, now that's a game I want to try out. Like, that feels different. Awesome. Like, yeah, I'm really excited for that. And then you learn it's not going to ever be released here, and you're like pissed off, and you're writing the freaking Nintendo remake because it's so unique and you want it so bad that you're willing to do that. And like, I cannot say that I would have been motivated to that degree for something presented in the way that this is, if that makes sense.
See that?
So,
all right. By the way, when does that game come out?
December 1st, I believe. Cool. Yeah, it's like less than a month. It's really close. So that's Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Let me know how much you guys hate me now after having said all this in the comment section. I had some debates with people about it last time I talked about this, which was in February or whenever that Switch Direct.
Oh, when that big presentation came out.
I think I gave some people the impression that I like was freaking pissed off. I hate everything about it, and I really don't want you to think that's the case. It's just I have some concerns, that's all. It's good, it's good. Awesome. I'll be super happy if it's good. Okay, let's move on to topic number 2. Anders Bod Mai. From someone who hasn't played Final Fantasy VII yet, what would you guys recommend? Should I play the old version or wait for the remake?
This will be a short one.
You came and asked the wrong guys.
Sorry. I wouldn't
if you wanted a fair
of waiting for the remake of basically anything. If you want to know it and if you want to get to know something and there's a remake coming and you don't know if you should wait or not, like basically across the board, just go do what already exists, you know, especially if it's something that people have fallen in love with and that is very critically acclaimed and such. Don't wait for it to be remade. Watch the original or play the original.
Yeah.
That's what I gotta say there.
It largely depends on who you are and when you started playing games and whether or not it's possible for you to go back to an era that, let's say you started gaming in like the PlayStation 3 era or something, you're a younger guy. And you go back and look at graphics from the PS1 era, and you're like, ugh, if you like recoil from that,
throw up.
it's gonna be a struggle.
Would you recommend this game because we don't know anything about it?
Well, I can't recommend it if the guy's gonna like be so put off by how it looks and how archaic it feels to play that you can't really stick with it.
Right?
Because that's gonna give you.
Would that then lead you to recommend he play the remake?
Yeah. If you're gonna have if I can predict from your current standard of what you enjoy in games that you will not enjoy this, then I would not recommend you go back and try and force yourself to do it.
I don't think we know enough about the remake to be able to do that, though. Like, you can infer, I guess, based on the gameplay that it's like you push a button and you attack people, and I guess that appeals to some people. But I wouldn't recommend it to anyone ever. So I guess I just don't know what it is. You know, we don't know anything about it. I guess that's where I come from.
I see what you're trying to say. And
I see what you're trying to say.
I understand that line of thought. I see where you're going with that. That makes sense to me. I think that like the reason why, like you, I wouldn't ever recommend to someone to play a game that we don't know much about. Like it's the same reason like you don't give a review or about something before you actually played it yourself, and you can actually like confidently recommend or not having a solid knowledge of the game, right? So like in that way, I agree totally. Like I'm not going to say, yeah, definitely play Final Fantasy VII Remake. Definitely don't play the original. But I will say, if you are not going to enjoy that kind of experience, like there's no basis there of appreciation for where games have come from in their history, and you can go back and look at something that looks pretty bad today and still enjoy it because it's like I just love the process. I love seeing where it's come from. If you can't appreciate that at all and you're not going to like it, then I can't recommend playing it because then you'll have a bad, you have a bad experience.
We'll turn Anders Bodmai into one of those flamers on the IGN comments that just talks about how overrated Final Fantasy VII is.
Exactly. That's exactly what will happen.
We don't want to do that.
Is that people today who have never played Final Fantasy VII are hearing from all these guys who grew up with it or whatever, it's the greatest thing ever, right? And then they go play it, and it's like without the context, without having been there, so to speak, even if you were there, but you didn't play it then, it's just not the same thing. It's really just not the same thing as having been there. So you're setting yourself up to feel somewhat disappointed according to what everyone's telling you how good it is. But at the same time, like if you are a person who, like I said, appreciates retro gaming and grew up in the era, like I can still go back and play NES games and like really appreciate them for what they are because I played those games back then. There's a part of me that sort of like remembers what it felt like and how exciting that was in the time. And so because of that, like I'm still able to go back and enjoy them. But like my sister, who was born in 1999, like has no personal tie to that era at all. So like you see something like that and that kind of person can question, what do you see in this? Like how can you enjoy this when you have this now instead and it's so much better, right? So it really just depends in my estimation. But if you did grow up with PlayStation 1 games and especially other RPGs, but you haven't played Final Fantasy VII, oh freak yes, like I
would say even if you didn't, give it a try. Like, try it. At least like turn on or emulate it. I don't care what you do, but just turn on the game and watch the opening cutscene and go through the first battle and see if you can't make it through like half hour of the game. And you know, then we can talk about the remake. But at least try the old game first. And if you're like, what do you see in this? Then okay, fine. You're a hopeless cause. But I get it.
I think something important for people to remember is that Final Fantasy VII, there were people who played it when it was new, who were around at that period of time that still did not like the game. So like,
there were.
It's not the case that somebody will definitely like it or not if they're into that era or not. But I would say that if you're someone who likes to talk about video games with anybody,
you need to be aware.
You should play Final Fantasy VII. Because I'm telling you right now, if you're that guy who's going to hop on an online forum, guys, I just played the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Here's what I think. As soon as someone finds out you didn't play the original, no one's going to listen to you anymore. Fair or unfair, no one's going to listen to you anymore. You know what I mean? That's going to happen. That's going to happen.
It would be like going on to like a Middle Earth or a J.R.R. Tolkien forum, having only seen the movie Lord of the Rings, and pretending that you know all about Lord of the Rings. You know? And people are just going to laugh at you.
Anyways. What to me the main reason for that is that what we're waiting for to come out is, I believe, will be an interpretation of the original game by just a different crew of people. And so by virtue of that fact, it's going to be one step removed from the original. It's a based on. It's a video game based on.
Yeah.
So it's like,
well, in that sense, it's like the recommendation is whether you play either is like, sure, you can play the remake, but that won't mean that you actually played Final Fantasy VII because it's going to be so different, right?
Yeah, and like what I'm saying might be super unfair, and a lot of people might disagree with me, but I do feel like
bringing on more comments on the video, then the more YouTube people watch it, so it's perfect.
I feel like if you want to talk about the story or anything, I guarantee you there's going to be aspects of the story that are crisis corified or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
For the remake, that so because they're going to try and reconcile some things. Probably. Yeah. And so, anyways, it's like so. I don't want to talk bad about anyone who is not interested in playing that and they do just want to play the remake. That's totally fine. But almost as like a warning, if you want to have any type of discussion about that, you're probably gonna have a hard time in groups of people discussing it moving forward. I feel like. But it's if you don't care about us, so who cares? Like,
yeah, exactly. So that aside, just me talking about me straight up from the heart, do you recommend waiting? No, definitely not.
Because who knows when it's going to come out? It could be 2 years down the pipe still.
Yeah, for one, it's probably still a long way away.
Yeah.
And so you're just waiting for no reason when you can just enjoy it now. But two, I have so little confidence in the current management and creative talent when it comes to storytelling within the Final Fantasy teams at Square Enix. I think they have great talent in other divisions that work on new IPs and other things. I think that the mindset of whether it's management that meddles with and interferes, there's tons of freaking speculation that we've all talked about before about why this or that Final Fantasy didn't meet expectations. Whatever it is, who knows what it is, but whatever it actually is, gives me very little confidence that this game will be like a very well-structured, engaging story like the original was for many of us. So for that reason...
the likelihood's pretty low that it's going to achieve that level.
For that, I mean, color me surprised if they do it. I will be the first one to champion that game because
we're all going to get it. We're going to play it.
The idea of that story being realized with modern technology to a similar level of satisfaction is a wonderful thing. I will be all over that. That's what I want to see. I don't believe it will happen, so I can't recommend that you wait. So there you go.
Well, that was longer than I thought it would be.
Gotta create some nuance. Just pull it
absolutely.
Somewhere out of the ether. Where is that nuance at? All right. Jons of Provo had sushi with this guy a couple weeks ago. It's a total beast. Had a great conversation. What's a video game villain that you agree with their motivations and actions? Try to think if you would make the same decisions they did regarding their motives. This is a hard question.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm having trouble thinking of specifics. I know it's happened before. I know that I've been able to some degree, I guess, sympathize with a lot of villains. I just can't think of who they are at the moment.
The first one that comes to my mind, and I'm sorry, but I just have to break out of video games because it's just the first one that comes to my mind because this is a really hard question, is there's a lot of stuff that the Joker says in The Dark Knight that I freaking agree with.
Oh, totally, yeah.
There's a lot of stuff he says. Well, when he's talking about why do people care about these people dying, not these people dying.
1,000 people die here, but then one person dies here, and we all care about the one.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
Obviously, he has an overarching philosophy of anarchy and, stuff that... But I think there's kernels. There's bits here and there, but I think in any good villain there is, because you can at least see why they see the world the way they do. But off the top of my head, I can't think of a video game one right now. I'll have to keep thinking.
So I'll name a couple. These aren't necessarily people, because it's really hard to nail down. Yes, I would have made all the same exact choices, given the circumstances.
Yeah, that's never gonna happen.
That's hard to nail.
Well, that probably won't happen for protagonists either, if you think about it.
True.
Like they're always going into dark hallways alone and like doing stupid things that you would never have actually done.
One that came to my mind was Letho from The Witcher 2. And that's largely because the world of The Witcher is so gray. It's kind of like Game of Thrones, where it's like, aside from like the Starks in Game of Thrones, like almost everybody has some like really dark side to them, or some weakness of character and morality that makes you go like, I don't necessarily know if I want to see you succeed, but I really don't want to see these guys that you're opposed succeed, so I guess I'm rooting for you. So The Witcher has like a similar sort of like world in that way. And the Witchers have become these outcasts, right? Like hated by society, treated very badly. They scrape by taking on these contracts to kill monsters and basically rescue people. Geralt himself goes through this character arc where he learns from, now I'm forgetting the name of his mentor. I can't believe that. I love this game so much, can't remember the character's name. Anyways, anyways, the guy who taught Geralt and the group he's with, like everything they know in their school, right? He gives him sort of like this idealistic view of what a Witcher is based on what they were and what like his generation kind of was before him. But in the current landscape, in the current world, like Witchers, they're treated really, really badly, right? And you know, they're seen as like cursed or like wicked, and a lot of different groups sort of preach that they're evil and they should be removed from the world and hunted down and stuff like that. So considering all the things that Witchers just generally go through, I could see them as it being very justifiable that they get really jaded and start to really just not care about other people and start to become very self-interested. And Letho in particular, his story, I think it's really easy to be like, yeah, the kings of this land, like there's no reason to feel sorry for them, and that you're going around assassinating these people, and that you're sort of siding with the empire that's kind of coming from the south and trying to take over, considering, you know, the kind of life that you have to live as a Witcher or whatever. So that's one that I could think of. I liked the idea of what they were trying to do with the brother of the main character in Fable 3. Without spoiling too much, like they make him seem very cruel. Well, he is. He's very cruel, and it seems like just ruthless and needlessly so. But then you learn the reasons why later in the game, and you're kind of put in the same position of like, oh, now I get why he was that way. And now do I become that way for the good reason that he was, or do I go against that? But the morality of that game is too simplistic for that to really work, in my opinion. And it's easily broken anyways, because then you can just make all the choices you want to make and get what you want. And it's, anyways, Fable 3 failed for a myriad of reasons. But I like the idea of that, right? And then the Templars in Assassin's Creed games, actually, they tend to do a pretty good job of making you think they're horrible, they're evil, and then they always describe as they're lying down on their death. Yeah. But I had all of these valid reasons for why I did what I did. And you go like, stop making good points, man. I'm supposed to to kill you. Haytham Kenway is one that I actually really liked in Assassin's Creed 3. I actually liked him better than the freaking actual protagonist of the game. I was like, this guy's a beast. I was loving that intro sequence. So those do a pretty good job of introducing some gray area where you don't really know, like, well, they got good points, but they got good points. So,
right.
Delita from Final Fantasy Tactics, another one that I can really relate to in some degree. But to say that I would become villainous in the same sense and I would make the same choices, hard to say when you haven't gone through what they have, but I have a hard time kind of saying yes or no to that. So,
yeah, I guess me too. But typically that would just encompass villains who favor like order over freedom, more or less. And so you'll have a
like
society,
authoritarian.
Exactly, very authoritarian leaders, because often they come from a place of Like they really think that they can do good and they want to help people, and the best way to help them is to tell them what to do and to make sure that the rich help pay for the poor, and to make sure that everything is like equal. And in order to do that, you have to enforce it. And when people are breaking laws, you're killing them or imprisoning them or whatever, and it ends up becoming Orwellian, I guess. And even though it's out of a place of wanting to do good, human nature just doesn't really work that way. And not only for the people you're governing, but for you yourself, you will end up kind of becoming what every communist country became, like after a decade or so of being communist. And
talking about
some animal
farm,
tyrannical. Exactly, animal farm. Yeah. And you start justifying things, and the ends justify the means. That's probably more or less where I'm going with this. When you start going along the lines of the ends justify the means, and you become a villain of that type, that's one I can at least understand and sympathize with, even though I would not agree.
Do it. Mm-hmm.
But I can at least see that they're doing it out of a place of compassion. But what's actually happening is very, very much a dystopian.
That's kind of Ender's Game with his brother. Dang, what's his brother's name?
Oh, yes.
Freak's his brother's name.
I know. He creates the persona that he purposely makes us everyone hate that persona, so that the sister's persona will be liked, and then those ideals will be the ones embraced and then move forward. And he, really cool idea.
Yeah, he's very brutal, but like this needs to be done, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, ends justify the means. Essentially, consequentialism is like totally what like Delita is all about in Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, it's like the absolute center of his philosophy. And what's so interesting about that game is that like Delita and Ramza are both fighting against the corrupt like lords of the current system, and like the church and like all of the I don't know what you call them. They're called Jarls in freaking Scotland.
The Jarls.
Similar idea, like, you know, the governing lords. The dukes. Yeah. Yes, that's what it is, the dukes. So they're both fighting the same thing, just in different ways. And they both want the same thing. But one says, does not matter what it takes as long as I achieve it. If I can get there faster by being brutal and cruel, I will.
Right, for the good of mankind.
What's better is that the kingdom is taken care of and that this ends. And the other saying no, like, you know, my morality, my philosophy says that, like, I'm not going to turn myself into what I hate before, you know, achieving the ends. It's not worth it. So, anyways, I was looking at a Reddit forum that kind of people were discussing this, and one person was actually talking about Ganondorf, which is not a villain I would have thought of before this.
Well, I was actually going to mention that. Yeah.
But yeah, his Wind Waker speech, I don't think it makes him empathetic for me, but at least for the first time I looked at him really differently. Let me see if I can... Ganon from Wind Waker... Ganon, where was this? Because it had the quote. Oh, here it is. My country lay within a vast desert. When the sun rose into the sky, a burning wind punished my lands, searing the world. And when the moon climbed into the dark of night, a frigid gale pierced our homes. No matter when it came, the wind carried the same thing, death. But the winds that blew across the green fields of Hyrule brought something other than the suffering and ruin. I coveted that wind, I suppose. It can only be called fate. That here I would again gather the three with the crests, that I should lay my hand on that which grants me wishes of the beholder, that when power, wisdom, and courage came together, the gods have no choice but to come down. The power of the gods, the Triforce, he who touches it will have whatever he desires granted. So it's not quite at the same level to where I'd be like, yeah, I empathize with the character, but the idea is my people suffer and die all the time, and those people don't, and I just want a better life for my people.
Right.
Like that's in essence, like at its core,
that's something you can see all over the world today, and that's, yeah.
And villains never see themselves as villains. I mean,
Exactly.
You want a better life for yourself. You want a better life for the people around you care about. Yeah. It's just, what are you willing to do, and who are you willing to hurt to make that happen? And that's where.
Yeah, you know, in the Zelda series, you typically have the Gorons, and they want to be in the volcano. They want to be in the mountains. They can handle that. They want to eat the crap that's there. And the Zoras, they want to be in the water. They want to swim around and whatever. They don't want to get frozen, but you know. And then you usually have the Highlands, and they're just vanilla, whatever.
Grass.
But the Gerudo are it's not exactly like this, but there's not like a reason why they're like choosing to live in the desert, like overtly at least. It's like they've adapted, but there's not like something like the Gorons or the Zora or whatever, or the Rito have.
The Rito.
Yeah,
it's like they can fly, so they can fly and live on these cliffs, and there's an advantage there. It's like the Gerudo kind of live in the crappiest place, and there's not like a good reason for it. They just do. It's like
the Hylians have the good land, and the Gerudo or where they are. Yeah.
And I've always thought about that because I've seen different web comics, and I think about a year ago we watched an animation some guy made about why Ganondorf was the way he was. But it's definitely, there's something there to explore if Nintendo cared enough to make it a major point. I've always thought it would be interesting to have people talk about Zelda games. It'd be interesting to have a Sheik game, sure, but I actually think it would be very, very interesting. Probably will never happen, but very interesting to have some type of Ganondorf game. Could be crazy. Or you play as a character that you don't know is Ganondorf in the end, or something along those lines.
So there's kind of like a BioShock reveal where all of a sudden it's like you're Ganondorf.
You got the Triforce, man. Here you go. Triforce of power, baby. What the bitch? Yeah. I think there's something good there, but obviously Nintendo doesn't tend to tap into that stuff too deeply. Like a speech from a final boss at the very, 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 very end of the game is not doing a lot usually.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll also say that the Metal Gear series usually does a pretty good job at this, but it's mostly because the villains are created by, they have a set of ideals, right? Like, yes, I'm fighting for good. I'm in the U.S. government or whatever, and like we're the good guys against the bad guys or whatever, and then they learn, nope, that's not the case. The government's screwing you over, screwing over the people you care about, and then they get jaded, and it's like kind of the same thing. It turns into consequentialism. It turns into the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
But they do a pretty good job, I feel, in that series of making the villains not just like blankly evil. They each have gone through something pretty difficult that gives them some validation when you think about it of why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that series as a whole does a good job, but like Boss and Big Boss from Metal Gear Solid 3 are good examples, I feel, of that. So anyways.
Yeah, they're very well, there's that authoritarianism again, and I think it's easy to have a villain that's that falls under authoritarianism. That's just, it's the thing. But like Kason just mentioned, like BioShock, the ideas behind BioShock are
foggy,
a little more like I don't know. There's it's hard to talk about without totally blowing the lid on the whole thing. But like, but there's it's interesting to have a villain that almost is trying to espouse freedom and kind of as an ideology, you know what I mean? That they're trying, they're espousing freedom in a way that you can believe them, right? I'm trying to make these people more free. I'm trying to get them away from all these bad people who want to take advantage of them or whatever. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think something that BioShock explores is the inevitability that an isolated utopia will become a dystopia, like because of humans. That's just how people are. And it happens over and over and over again, and it's hard to
apparently in infinity times infinity times.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I think there's something to that actually.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yuns of Provo, beastly question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah.
Captain Awesome asks another good question. What makes a boss fight memorable and or enjoyable? And what were some of your most favorite enjoyable boss fights?
The most memorable boss fight for me, hands down, and always will be, is Bowser at the end of Super Mario World.
Nice.
I'll never forget that. Probably because we played it a lot.
The Bickling balls?
The Bickling balls. We were pretty bad at games, right? And so, like, it was a miracle that we got that far.
Oh,
like, it took us a long time to get to that whole game. And we would all be playing on, like, the same file, right? So it'd be like somebody else would take a turn, and we were always cycling through, trying to just beat certain levels, get out of the Forest of Illusion. But Bowser was hard, man, for us, like, at the time. Yeah. Bowser was really hard, so we probably fought him so many times, that's why I remember him. But it was so weird. Also, he's in a clown thing.
I know, who designed that?
That's whack, dude.
That twirly helicopter, like, bowl that he
flying
sits
out
in.
a clownmobile.
Yeah, that's weird.
I don't know. But that's probably always going to be the most memorable boss fight for me. It was, it's one of those bosses where, I don't know, like, the stages and the way things accelerate, the pacing of the battle gets, and the way the music plays into it, it gets so frantic. You're like freaking out as he's stomping, and you're trying to get away from as he's stomping, and I love that one. Even going back and playing it, the game's not as hard for me now, but I still really like that boss battle a lot.
It's good. I'd say probably Mario 64 would actually be. That's what I thought you were going to say when you said.
Oh yeah.
Grabbing Bowser by the tail and like spinning him around and throwing him.
So long, Bowser.
Yeah,
well, that was genius because they were making use of the analog stick.
Oh yeah,
it was like the way you kill him is kind of unique to how the analog stick works.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that was a good basketball. That was interesting. That was very stood out a lot to me.
But, so there's really a lot of ways to answer this question because there's many different things that can make a boss fight memorable. I'd say a lot of it comes down to that's one. That's actually one. Like freaking Dark Souls, right? Dark Souls has some incredibly good boss fights, some of the best ever, and it also has some of the worst boss fights ever. Freaking like the Quaylog, I think. Anyways, the way you have to kill that boss is just freaking dumb. Because it relies on making a leap over like a chasm, and the jumping in Dark Souls is not good. So like that's one example. I didn't even think I'd bring that up, but that's true. Boss fights can be so bad they're memorable. But if we're talking about favorites and good boss fights, generally I tend to enjoy, because I'm the kind of person, I have a very conservative sort of like personality in a lot of ways. When I go out to eat at a restaurant, I get the same thing that I like every time. I don't try new things. I get into a way of doing things, and I just do it that way every time. And so while it's frustrating for me at first, when boss fights and game design is sort of crafted in order to force you into experimentation and trying other things, initially it's like, oh, geez, I'm uncomfortable. But I really love that because it helps me with a side of my personality that I don't like as much, as that I tend to try and just hang on to doing things one way, or just a way that works. And then you're just repeating the same strategy over and over again, or the same way of doing something over and over again. And in order to get like the full breadth of what the game offers and like everything that's there, it's really nice to have boss fights that are designed to say like, nope, you can't just fight this the same way as everything else. You have to gain a mastery of all of the mechanics that are here. And so I tend to really enjoy that, but I don't think that's the only way to make a boss fight really memorable. I also really liked Shadow of the Colossus approach to it as well, where each boss is almost a puzzle. You're trying to sort of like figure out, how do I get it down so that I can get onto it, and then when I get onto it, where are the points on it? And it's almost you're trying to like figure out what to do as you're going through it. It makes you think a little bit more. So a lot of those boss fights in Shadow of the Colossus are extremely memorable for that reason for me. And and the other side of it is just like of course awe, like being able to awe or create, like, because it's a really tough balance. You don't want to make the boss so hard that it seems completely impossible and you walk away from it. At the same time, you want the player to feel a real sense of danger, like I could die any moment.
Yeah.
But you want them to succeed so that they get the excitement and the rush, but they overcome it and you get the satisfaction from overcoming it, right? And so like Shadow of the Colossus, I think is actually a pretty easy game. It's not really hard to avoid damage from the Colossi normally because they're very slow. But they were able to, with the way they presented things, sort of create that feeling. Like, whoa, just the awe of like, how could I possibly take that down? And then you sort of get into it and it feels like this really like difficult task that you overcame. They sort of create that feeling without it actually ever being hard necessarily. And so I remember the one Colossi that flies up and then you like shoot the sacks underneath it and it comes flying down and you're racing on the horse and you jump off the horse and like onto the thing as it's flying. It's just like, that was just so cool. That gave me that feeling as I was playing it, even though it wasn't necessarily a very difficult fight.
Right.
I'm trying to think of another example. I don't know. Those are kind of just like my initial thoughts on it, but there are a lot of different ways to make something really memorable, and having one or other or all of them together would be best. But
yeah, it's easy to go with the having something huge, like it's so big, and that makes it memorable. That's not always the best way to do it, but a lot of times big things, like humans are in awe of big things. So.
Well, along those lines, I think that God of War, a lot of its boss fights rely on quick time events for the sake of awing the audience with spectacle, right? And it's like, that's going a little too far in a direction I don't like. I don't appreciate that.
Yeah, there's ways to do
feels
wrong for sure.
Yeah, that feels artificial versus the way that Shadow of the Colossus did it, which felt very real. Felt like I was the one doing it. So,
exactly.
Another thing I was going to bring up actually is just cleverness, like boss designs that give you multiple ways to defeat them. Like Metal Gear Solid as another example, there's a sniper in Metal Gear Solid 3. He's really old, like a super old guy, but he's like the best sniper ever. And he's like up, and like the whole thing is basically you just trying to sneak through and find where the guy is and like snipe him at the same, or I guess, but the other way you could do it is you could avoid him all the way up and like stab him in the back or shoot him in the head when you get close to him, or and this was the craziest one, you could save the game right there and step away from the game for I don't know how long it was, like a few days, and the guy dies because he's super old, so his life just comes to an end if you don't play the game for a week and you come back and turn the game on.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Because it's like as if you sat there for days just like waiting it out, and he just dies. Psycho Mantis is a famous example in Metal Gear of just like this clever boss design where it read your memory card, and you know, stuff like that. So I feel like a lot of boss designs in Metal Gear where insert that sort of like gimmick, but not in the negative sense of the word, but that clever sort of like idea that you don't really see often, that can go a long way to making a boss fight super memorable as well. So, but bosses that you can approach it from several different tactics or ways and finish it off. And then you could talk to your friend and be like, oh man, I fight the boss and I killed like this. Whoa, you did that? I did this. And they had a totally different way of doing it. And you know, it just makes it more interesting.
You know, we've talked about a lot of things between all of us, and we did not touch on any RPG bosses. And I would throw this out there that I don't think RPG bosses are the least enjoyable to me. Like a 20-minute RPG menu, like defend, attack, defend, like systematic boss battle is probably my least favorite, the least enjoyable type of boss battle.
I agree, and I think that largely it has to do with not the fact that there's not potential for some really interesting boss fights. There definitely have been some great traditional turn-based JRPG boss fights, but they tend to rely on give the boss a lot of damage, a lot of HP.
Yeah, just keep doing what you do and rack, Yeah,
just continue the same repetitive actions for a long time. Just outlast the boss rather than outthink the boss or out-skill the boss or something like that.
There's just not opportunities for that.
There's more of that in turn-based JRPGs than elsewhere, I think. And I kind of agree with that sentiment. But
that's what, like, it's like, for the most part, they just come up with stages for the boss, right? Like, he's this thing. Well, he'll do this. Yeah. Then you beat that, and now he's this thing where he'll do something different. And growing up, it was like you could beat the first stage, but not the second one. Yeah. And so then what made it hard was like, okay, just play it again. You know you're going to die, but just this is a trial run to find out what thing you're missing, or like what attack you needed to build up, or what. But like there's opportunities to do clever things in RPGs, but I think that the fact is by the time you've reached a boss, they've done all the clever stuff already to make other fights interesting. And so the boss can combine other bosses together, as a lot of games do. I don't like it in a game, honestly, when the final boss is fight all the other bosses from the game and then fight this guy.
Hate that. Yeah, that's the worst.
There's a lot of games that do that. A lot of games that I enjoy, and
some Zelda games do that.
Exactly. I was thinking of Legend of Zelda does that a bunch. I don't like that.
Freaking Chrono Trigger does that too.
Chrono Trigger too.
Yeah, and it's like thematically, it's almost like a greatest hits kind of, like remember this guy? Remember this guy? Like wasn't that
it's like the ending credits almost for all year.
Exactly. I just feel like it's a little lazy but I think it's usually because to make other battles interesting, you ran into a guy who was using poison a certain way, or you ran into a guy that you had to use life healing magic on to kill him because he was a zombie, right? Or like those kinds of things have already happened in the game, and so it's almost like I feel like they've exhausted their rule set. So then all they're left with the final boss is high HP numbers,
just head to head, do as much as you can,
or lots of phases, or make it long. So it's
interesting because I look at 5IC7, 8, 9, 10, 12, the ones that I played recently. And it's just like, I wouldn't say they're bad. They're representative of the game, really, and they work, and that's how it is. But yeah, the genre isn't
it's almost more
the
like
big, awe-inspiring boss.
Like the idea of the boss, and then what he has to say.
Exactly, like that's more important.
So there you go. Our thoughts on boss fights.
Very much so.
Okay. Chris Ewan. Good question here. What is the difference between things that pull you out of a game world versus gaming conventions that you just accept? For me, it feels random. For example, I hate quick travel in Skyrim and scorecards at the end of levels or combat in games that should feel urgent. But it doesn't bother me that rabbits drop money in Final Fantasy VI, or that landscapes always end in cliffs falling off into oblivion. What do you guys think?
The randomness, it may feel random, but that doesn't mean it is random. Like there's all sorts of things that game developers are doing, and that maybe even were done on accident, to where you're in the game, you're playing the game, you're in the zone, everything's flowing right, and you just don't care to trivialize things like, why is this rabbit dropping money? Or fast travel in Skyrim or whatever. I get his points. But I wouldn't say it's random. I would say that if there are certain things that you hate, and this is still be personality based, right? Because most people don't hate quick travel. I don't like to use it very often, but I'm glad it's there when I need it. So, but yeah, it's a game design thing, and you can at least mitigate that to a large degree by keeping things flowing and keeping your game paced well, and keep the suspension of disbelief. And that's the artist's fault when that breaks.
So the example for me that comes to mind is Persona 5. There's a lot of tutorial type stuff in the beginning of that game. Like every RPG has to do this, because they have to teach you, like, here's how the battle system works. They can't like games like Breath of the Wild that can have a tutorial area where you get to play with mechanics and combine mechanics as you see fit and try and figure things out. Or to me, that's like the ideal way to do it. But in like a turn-based battle RPG with like all different types of systems at play, you can't just be like, throw someone in there and figure it out. That's when people get frustrated and quit. They need some guidance. But I far prefer, and I think I mentioned this when I was talking about Persona 5 earlier this year, I like that Persona 5 doesn't try and make it one of the characters. Typically, there's a couple exceptions to this, but they typically don't try and make it like one of the characters is explaining a game mechanic to you. Usually the game just pops up a thing, and it gives you like a couple cards to read, which I can see people hating that. I can totally see people hating that. But I appreciate the fact that they're not trying to shoehorn in and have a character explain to me within their world why I need to do this such and such thing or look at such and such thing that isn't necessarily in the story. You know what I mean? Like, I really, really appreciate that actually about Persona 5. They were able to just keep, there's this surface level, and then there's the deeper, there's the actual game. And you understand that this is the lens that you're looking at the game through, because that's always the case. Like, the fact that there's a HUD at all in a video game it's information for you. It's great. It is. If you went to see a movie and there was a health meter for the freaking guy protagonist,
so you know he's about to die.
Yeah. So it's Ethan Hunt, and he's like, and there's like, he's gonna get the knock list, and he's hanging down there, almost touching the ground, and there's like a meter, like how stressed he is or whatever. It's like bullcrap. No, I don't need that. But in games, you need more information usually than the character themselves has. So like, there's almost always that element of some kind of overlay or something there that you have that the character doesn't. Some games do very little. Like Skyrim does very little that way. You have a compass, and the waypoints. When you get hit, you see your bars and stuff. But I feel like you can't ever completely get away from it. There's always some surface level this is understood to be for the player. So it might be like what Kaysen's saying, like poor execution can draw more attention to that.
Yeah.
For example, I would say something I do not like is in Zelda games when it's you're hearing this constant beeping because you're at low health.
Yeah, that's annoying.
It's like, I get why. That's information for you. Link is not hearing this sound. He's not sitting there going like, the fetch is going on my head. Which they've mitigated that. Breath of the Wild has a better tone to it, and it doesn't sound as often. But in some Zelda games, and I've always wondered if the reason was just to make you more anxious. But you'll constantly, and you're like, I know, I'm looking for some freaking help. Stuff like that. Like, I don't like. There's definitely ways that can take away from what you're experiencing.
It is pretty crazy when you're fighting a boss and all of a sudden you get hit and you hear that going, and it's just like, holy fetch. Like, that does make your heart start pumping.
Yeah, it's true. So I don't know, like, what. See, some of this is almost more like what do you call it, like didactic or whatever, like, where
it's straightforward.
And it's like a rabbit dropping money or something. Like, it's like, well, if rabbits didn't drop money, you'd have less incentives to fight these rabbits, or they wouldn't be able to give you as much stuff, so you're like justifying it versus like something like I'm like Case in the same way with fast travel. I usually try to not use the fast travel unless I have to, but games like Skyrim, I don't know. It definitely enhances the experience, because if you want to make a world so big, you've gotta. There's the trade-off. So it could be that some people don't think the trade-off is worth making, and then some people think that it is a trade-off worth making, and that's something for the developers to try and balance out. Like, you need money in this game, and the only way to get it is through fighting people. So if you're fighting a lot of rabbits, well, they should still give you some money, I guess, because otherwise you're gonna have a hard time doing whatever, and it's like a game balance issue. So
you could just find money lying around.
You could cut grass and
walk around. You could find it in the grass.
So, video games, more than just about any other medium, especially have been built on a foundation of a time period where they relied heavily on abstractions. They had to use abstractions because they could not replicate a real life experience or simulation perfectly. So the idea of a health bar is an abstraction. Are we supposed to believe that the character has been sliced with a sword 17 times and is the next one's gonna get him? You know what I mean?
Even if it's on his fingers, like, nope, you're dead.
Yeah. No. That's an abstraction. It's an abstract way of thinking about bleeding out or whatever it is, right? And especially since we talk so much about RPGs and JRPGs on this channel, those games in their roots like really rely on abstractions for almost everything. No, we're not meant to think that Cloud waited for the Shinra soldier to shoot him in the face before he decided to attack. No, we're not meant to believe that he's as tall on the world map as all the buildings in the village that he's standing next to, and the mountains and things like that. No, we're not meant to think that as you're running around on the map, you come across an enemy and you can't just avoid it or go the other direction or whatever. You know, these things are all abstractions for ideas that are created because of the limitations of the technology at the time to create those kinds of simulations. So for me, the idea of a rabbit dropping money is an abstraction for the idea that you took the rabbit and you skinned it for its pelt and you sold the pelt and you made money from that. Now, as we move forward in the series to Final Fantasy XII, where the game starts to become a little bit less abstract, the more realistically you can portray these things, that's exactly what it is. The enemies drop hides and different materials that you then take to the village and you sell. But all of a sudden, the process of making money becomes a lot longer. You can't just kill the thing and get the money. You have to kill the thing, take the material, go all the way back to the town, sell it to get the money. And with fast travel, it's exactly the same thing. We want these bigger worlds that feel more realistic and that are open to traverse. But do you really want to have a world that realistically portrays travel, like in real life, where I have to get in a car and drive 5 hours to get to Las Vegas from where I live? Am I really going to sit through a realistic portrayal of travel in that way in a game? Of course not. So you have to rely on an abstraction. So the question for me is a matter of balance. What kind of simulation are you creating? And what kinds of abstractions are going to
get away with?
Yes, are going to not only be something that you can get away with necessarily, but that will make the experience better, because without it, it just becomes impossible. And I think this is actually... Go ahead.
What was it? If rabbits drop money in Call of Duty, that's different. From
all of a sudden, you're like, that's not right. Yeah,
exactly.
Versus, it's the amount of abstraction that is acceptable for what you're doing with the vision of the game. And so as games become more realistic all the time, all of a sudden those abstractions that were acceptable before are no longer acceptable. It doesn't make sense. It feels weird. It feels out of place. And so fast travel is something... I mean, I remember telling my buddy this because Oblivion came out while I was living in Vegas. I wasn't able to play video games at the time because I was serving a mission. I was doing work and service and that sort of thing. So I told my friend, "Oh, dude, I'm going to go home and I'm going to get Oblivion, and I'm not going to fast travel ever in that game. I'm going to play that game as if I'm really in that world. And if I make a mistake about where I went, like, I have to pay the price for that and I got to go backtrack or whatever." I thought that was going to be an enjoyable experience. That lasted about 20 minutes. And I was like, no way can I do this. This is way too big. It's just going to take way too much time to do it that way. And so... even sometimes when you have an idea that you would enjoy a simulation being so lifelike that it's almost like you're there, a lot of times I think you'll find the parts of life that are mundane are not exciting enough to carry a video game experience, and you have to have abstractions of some kind to skip that.
I think if you were to plot it out, I think that because talking about simulations, and those are some of my favorite types of games that are simulations. So you have this far left end where it's like, okay, as this game becomes more realistic, it's less fun to play, right? Like that drops off. But then I feel like it actually starts ticking back up when you get to the extreme realism end, because as we've seen the last almost decade or so, farming simulator, the truck driving simulator, what's that one called? Where you drive semi trucks down actual interstate you know,
yeah, it's so realistic. You're in an actual place
in Europe, and
yeah,
and you're actually sitting there, and this is going to take you an hour to transport this cargo to this place, and I think that that's a niche like subgenre, but I do think that there's this like almost simulation uncanny valley in the middle where it's like it's not fulfilling enough of a simulation need, like a flight simulator. Flight simulators have kind of gone out of popularity, but they used to be the most popular PC games year after year were flight simulators. That was up through like the early 2000s. And I remember the first time I played a flight simulator at a friend's house, and it was like, this is bullcrap. Boring. Because I couldn't take off. I couldn't do anything. But it was because literally it was simulating the real thing.
Right, you gotta know.
There's a satisfaction that you get knowing that this is a one-to-one simulation as close as you can get it. Right. And then I think that's where that enjoyment kind of takes back up. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I'm actually learning how to fly a real plane. And as we know from like some of the pilots from 9/11, it was like they were using flight simulators to learn to execute something in real life. And it's possible to do that.
It actually like,
to learn a real thing. Yeah. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Like games get less fun the more realistic that they get. In a lot of ways, you need to make trade-offs, except for at that far extreme end where you're like, I'm really learning how to fly a plane here.
Yeah, I do wonder though. I agree with you almost completely. I do wonder though, are there flight simulators where you sit on 7-hour flights across the ocean? You know what I mean?
Because there's no point. There's no point in that. That might exist, but there's no point in that because
it's taking off and landing.
Pilots don't do anything. Yeah, it's mostly taking off and landing. Most often, what's interesting in a flight simulator is flying something like. Typically, they'll have jets.
They'll have an Air Force One replica. Sometimes you can see what it's like to fly the Air Force One, and that for jet enthusiasts, that's a big deal.
For example, a lot of the flight simulators in the late '90s were flight simulators for one specific type of plane. So you bought the one for this one plane because this is the one that you're obsessed with. Because people are like way into aviation and airplanes and stuff like that. They get into like this is the one that they know everything about, you know. And that's at the extreme end of everything. So on the end of like wanting to fly a transatlantic flight and literally do nothing for 6 hours, like pilots really do.
Yeah.
People probably aren't going to do that.
Like Pilot's Life, right? Like a game where you literally sit the whole way. Like no one's going to want that. So like.
Because there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do at all.
Even
you can't. There's nothing to do.
Reality, there's nothing. Yeah, it's true.
And
like
I mean,
if you're driving the truck in the truck. What is that game called? It's like truck something.
Oh, Euro something.
Yeah, Euro Truck Simulator. I think that's what it is. You're there's something to do. You're steering around that guy. But flying a plane, you just freaking sit there.
Well, even with farming simulators, right? Not that I'm well versed in farming simulators, but I would assume time is not 1-to-1 in real life, and you actually go out and work on a farm for like 10 hours.
Because,
right. First of all, that's not possible. Like no one has the time for that. And second of all, that's really freaking boring.
Yeah.
Even if you're into the simulation experience, at some point there's got to be some level of abstraction to where time passes more quickly. You get to the next day, something to keep it more interesting.
Yeah, there definitely is, because just strictly for the fact that human beings don't have time in a day to do something that takes up the time that a normal job takes. Because like if you have a job or whatever, you're going to school or whatever, you don't have that much time to play a game at the end of the day. So I would almost say that like the constraint is not that there aren't people that would want to do some of these things.
I wonder though, is there somebody that would do that?
It might be, but there's a game developer podcast I was listening to recently, and they were just saying the number one rule of developing a video game is respect the player's time, right? And so like to the extent that somebody's willing to do XYZ, there's obviously extreme. Like I remember when Jeremy was my roommate, and he had I don't know if it was one of the Arma games or what it was, but it was a scenario game, and that's back when I was playing Call of Duty. It was a scenario game where North Korea or somebody like that invades the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. Oh, what was that game? It was like Dragon something or other.
I seem to remember it was China.
So maybe
taking over
that makes more
the
sense.
disputed islands between them and Japan, or Korea, or Taiwan, or one of the islands.
it was a scenario.
China.
It was supposed to be like a real scenario. And I remember trying to play the game, and it was like, go here, wait here for like half an hour. These guys are going to meet up with you, so, you know. And then you waited, and then now we've got this next waypoint, and you'd make your way there, and then like wait here for like half an hour because we need these planes are coming in to support. And so to the extent that there's still an abstraction in that, because in real life you'd probably go and wait a whole day. It just seems like maybe at that extreme end, it's still a very long time to wait.
Yes. They're still getting across the idea that
there's like it's like if you're playing Pilot Wing 64, you're like, this is fun. I enjoy flying through the rings and the hoops or whatever, and that's cool. But then you got the flight simulator in. It's like that's cool because you're learning a real thing. But in the middle, there's not as much satisfaction, I guess.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
You know, Mike, when you
go ahead.
Oh, if you have something to say more relevant to this, I was going to totally change the subject.
I was just going to say real quickly that this is actually a video that I've been planning on making for a while. I'll probably do it after I'm done with the Final Fantasy 13 discussion series. But there was somebody, you know, because in my FF12 review, I talked about the way they handle field maps and how I appreciate that more than open worlds. I've kind of come to that conclusion. Not that, and again, I'll go into detail about why I think that and where I think open worlds really succeed in comparison even to this. But I feel like open worlds tend to feel super small. One, because they have to be. You can't, like, just we're limited by the technology. You can't freaking replicate seamlessly a continent the size of the United States in a video game and expect people to actually enjoy traversing that kind of distance. It's just not going to work. So I prefer abstraction like overworlds in the old Final Fantasy games to give you an idea of how far you're going without actually making you go that far. But I think even when you're trending towards a little bit more of a realistic interpretation, like Final Fantasy 12, I still like zones because the idea is that you zone somewhere else and you've traversed a long distance in between those two zones. And now we get to some more exciting things. Here, let you play for a while, and then you go even further. The world feels bigger because of that than Final Fantasy 15, which takes place on a tiny island. Tiny. Really, really small. You could drive across it in 10 minutes. Very, very small island. So the sense of scope that you're trying to get from these epic fantasy RPGs, I think, can be diminished by open worlds that don't use zone structures. So the way The Witcher did it is it has these humongous open world areas, but it has like 4 of them in the game. And then you get on a boat and you sail to that one. And so you get the idea that these areas are far away from each other, but you still get the seamless sort of like traversal without all the loading times of an open world game more like Skyrim or Final Fantasy 15 or something. But you still get this sense that there's more to the world than what you're seeing. And so I think there's just this line that you're walking between abstraction and like realistic simulation that kind of touches on what Chris is asking here about why is it okay? Why am I okay with this weird concept in this game, but I'm not okay with this one in this game? And I think it mostly has to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, there's the balance, there's the trade-off there. But what I find interesting what Chris is saying here is he dislikes quick travel in Skyrim.
Yeah, that is a good
Why does he dislike quick travel in Skyrim is fascinating to me because what we've been discussing this whole time is that quick travel allows you to enjoy a world in a way that would be frustrating otherwise. However, apparently Chris...
Perhaps it's because Skyrim is a more realistic interpretation or simulation of traveling, and it feels abrupt or like, oh, I shouldn't be able to do this. That doesn't feel real to me.
Sure.
In comparison
I think that's a big part of it.
So there's the realism aspect. Like I went from the bayou to the snowy mountains or whatever really quickly. Like Skyrim still has zones. They're not as extreme. It's not like Breath of the Wild where there's the Breath of the Wilds are like there's the jungle right next to the biome changes very quickly. It's like right next to like a forest. But the thing is if you are in Riften in Skyrim and you need to do something in it's the freaking capital in the northwest corner. What's that called? What? That's dang it. Can't remember what that one's called. But let's say you have to go there, right? regardless of like being like, oh, I feel like the environment changed or whatever, like what Chris is saying here, I hate the quick travel. I hate quick travel in Skyrim. It's like he doesn't want the ability to be able to. So if you're going to take that on your horse, I think that's like a half hour to go from one end of that map to the other end of the map. You know what I mean? And so presumably Chris is okay with taking a half an hour to travel this, regardless of whether a biome changed or whatever. It's a long time. It's half an hour to go somewhere, right?
Chris is hardcore.
Well, I mean, I believe it's for the same reason that I was saying I was going to do that in Oblivion. It's like this world feels so real and alive that I want the experience of living in a fantasy world, all the way down to even having to walk and traverse the distance like 1-to-1. It ended up that I didn't really feel that way, and I'm presuming or making assumptions on Chris's part. He'll have to answer in the comments, but that's one reason I could think of for why I don't like fast travel, because it breaks the illusion in a simulation environment that feels so real otherwise. Whereas in a game like Final Fantasy VI, it's like I just walk to the next town depending on random battles, of course, in a matter of a minute or two.
Which, when you think of it, that's still quick travel. Like Final Fantasy VI
it's exactly the same thing.
It's just you're a massive flippant giant who can walk across the continent in 40 seconds, right? But that's okay. It's for some reason it's more palatable than quick travel in Skyrim.
So then does it become, as opposed to I hate using quick travel, it's I hate that it is available.
I hate that this world has technology that doesn't exist in my world. Right? Like somehow it's so realistic, but they can do this thing that's not realistic.
Yeah, I don't know, because time still passes. It's like, I remember, like in Breath of the Wild, I really didn't fast travel pretty much ever. Towards the very end, when I was trying to find the last few shrines,
then I traveled.
I fast traveled.
I actually think that the reason for that is because it innovated in a lot of ways the way that you can traverse the world. Like the fact that literally any surface in the freaking game you can climb. Yeah, kind of changes, like, I guess, the way that you explore or travel. So it's like, oh, I have to go from this town to this one. Let's use Skyrim, for example. Let's exclude the fact that you can just jump or ride a horse straight up the side of a freaking mountain, right? You're not supposed to be able to do that. I'll use Horizon Zero Dawn as a better example, because in Horizon Zero Dawn, there are mountains in ways that they block you off. So you have to take the long way around, right? So it's like, if I want to go over there, I have to freaking walk all the way around this mountain and come around on the other side. Versus Breath of the Wild, where it's like, I will just climb this mountain and go straight there. An A to B sort of line. And so I feel it makes it easier to just avoid fast travel when you can find all these interesting ways of traversing. And
that's true. Yeah. That's a good point. I feel like for me, the world of Breath of the Wild is I don't understand the people that feel like it's an empty world, and
I don't either.
One of the reasons why I feel that, in the developer talks that they've given since the game came out, they've shown that they scaled the world to roughly the size of the city of Kyoto, which is where Nintendo's headquarters is located. And what they did was they superimposed a map of Kyoto, and they mapped out major landmarks within Kyoto. Well, how far between certain Shinto shrines, how far between certain Buddhist temples, places of shopping, the Emperor's Palace, where the rivers, how spaced apart are those rivers, that whole thing, because Kyoto's in a valley. And they matched the density, the landmark density of Kyoto with the game. Some of those landmarks being more obscure things like a Korok or whatever. But it's a thing. It's something still in the map that you can interact with and run across. And I think that's freaking genius. I've never heard exactly what like Ubisoft's approach is to that sort of thing. I know oftentimes I'll talk about, we literally did the map of freaking Jerusalem or whatever at this point in time. But I thought that was really genius, because it kind of hits you at like a human level of, you expect to run across something somewhat significant every so often when you're traversing the real world. And to the extent that they were able to mirror that, I think helped a lot with the because when I think about the scale, like talking about Final Fantasy 15, think about the scale of that game, and then I think about the scale of Breath of the Wild, and the scale of Breath of the Wild, I couldn't even begin to tell you how much of the real world this like square shaped continent is. I have no idea. It's some games make it more obvious, like this is a large area, but here it's like, I don't know, this could be gigantic, this could be small. I have no idea, but it was never anything I was really thinking about that often. And part of that might be that the art style helps, because the more realistic you try to make a game, which is why I think in Red Dead Redemption, I have a harder time with the biome shifts really rapidly, because that game's pretty real looking, especially for its generation.
Yes.
Which makes me wonder about the new one coming up, how they're going to handle that. Breath of the Wild, it's like, it's Ghibli aesthetic. It's like, this is a cartoon, man.
And I think that sort of, for me, that sort of reinforces like where I'm coming from, is that when you take Skyrim's realistic world and you have those abrupt biome changes, it's like, what the fetch? That's not right. But when you're taking a game with an art style that's meant to serve as an abstraction, it's way easier to swallow. Do I believe that Link is a freaking cartoon man? No. It's an abstraction. It's an art style that gives you a feeling that sort of like brings all that stuff together. And so...
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I tend to enjoy games that actually have what I would consider to be an art direction.
Yeah, because the weird things they do are more palatable.
And
when weird things happen, it gives the art the more artistic freedom.
Like you walk into a town in Skyrim, and there's freaking 7 people that live in the town. And at first it's fine, but after a while, when you get into the game where it's like, I'm launching an attack, and this is part of a gigantic war, and then you start seeing the number of people, and then you think, oh, okay, because I'm playing a video game.
Yes.
Yeah,
you know, it's like,
because it feels real otherwise,
and it's like developers have gotten a little ahead of themselves. With the visual, like, because they can pull off most of the time. You can pull off a very realistic looking environment with certain constraints, but then when you try and do something that breaks that the art direction or the it's like, oh, okay, like I showed up with freaking 10 people to storm Whiterun and fetched them up, and that was the great battle.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right.
Guild, all of a sudden it's like, wait, the Thieves Guild's a freaking army. It's like
in this world,
it's like, holy crap! This rivals the great, city states of the nation.
Yeah,
it's totally true. It's totally true, and that's where I think that you have to walk a fine line, and it's actually why I like open worlds that take place in cities. Something like Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in Rome.
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah. Grand Theft Auto pioneered the city open world.
Exactly.
Like, that's such a great thing, because it's like you can get much closer to that idea of simulating a real life experience. Like, people stay in their cities. They don't freaking travel across the world all the time. And so you can give a realistic interpretation of a large space without sort of breaking that at any point with biome changes and all this stuff that's supposed to make you feel like you've gone to like a totally different climate, a totally different like area of the world, but within this limited space. When you're doing a city, it's like that is so much easier to simulate realistically. So that's where I think open worlds really shine. And if they're going to try and do like more of a world scope, I appreciate zones quite a bit more. Because that abstraction helps swallow the changes, or helps me to swallow them.
It's kind of like in let's say like one of the Bourne movies or Mission Impossible. Sometimes you can make it feel like either crazy stuff's happening or the plot's moving if you just go somewhere else.
Right.
Things are developing. Stuff happened. I went somewhere really far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And video games try and mimic that, and definitely an open world video game trying to do that.
Oh, that's such a good example. You just gave me an awesome idea for my freaking video, because, well, the idea of cutting in movies, right? Like,
it's like the Final Fantasy 12 thing,
Yes, and it's the same exact feeling. You feel like time has passed and stuff has happened in between now and now.
Yeah, totally.
And like that, everyone's okay with that. Nobody wants to watch a movie where you hop on a plane or onto a ship with Indiana Jones and you freaking sail to where you're going. Like, no one wants to actually sit there through all of that.
Right.
People are so okay with that in the Dark Knight Rises, apparently Bruce Wayne travels halfway around the entire freaking world in like a day.
Yeah, I know.
With no money and nothing else.
Yeah.
And it's
That's right.
Oh, cool. He's where I wanted him to be. I was ready to see what he's going to do.
Yeah, and so like if you can get the sense of scope from a spy film where the guy is going to all these different countries in the movie to these different enormous set pieces, and you're not upset by like, oh, that's not realistic. It's the same exact concept with zones.
Totally.
And like to say, I don't know, because there was a guy, the reason I wanted to make the video is because there was a guy who like freaked out at me in the Final Fantasy 12 review comment section about how stupid it was to say that I preferred zone structure over open world. And
you should call him out. You should show his comments.
I'm totally going to. But yeah, I mean, so like there's a certain level of abstraction in video games, depending on the vision, depending on the aesthetic, depending on what kind of game you're making, that's going to be acceptable here, but won't be acceptable here. And I think that that's largely the reason why. Kaysen was going to say something a while back, and then you let me say something. I don't know.
We ended up covering it,
okay.
So we ended up touching on it.
It has been said.
All right. Well, there you go, Chris. Great question.
That was a good topic.
Now, here's
Chris,
the trouble.
I want to know, why do you not like Fast Skyrim? I want to know why.
Here's the thing. Now, how do I summarize what that topic was as the title of the video? I have no idea how to do that.
An open letter to Chris.
And I got to make people click because they want to watch it.
Right, because that's an interesting discussion.
Got
an open letter?
Work the word Final Fantasy somehow into that so that people on the channel will watch it.
I could not believe what this one Final Fantasy did.
And neither will you. And then put like a red circle somewhere in the thumbnail. That just like some random spot. So people are like, oh, what's there? I can't see it. And then they'll click the video.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Some people do it.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, let's move on to our last topic. Press start to play. I saw, by the way, he was talking about watching our podcast on Twitter, and he had gotten through all of our podcasts. He missed every single one of them.
Yeah, he got through all of them. It's crazy.
That's a lot of podcasts.
That's a lot of really incorrect theories to listen to.
And bad predictions.
Final Fantasy 15, the NX, yeah.
Really bad predictions. Holy fish.
Hey, we were just listening to what like Super Metal Dave was saying.
Okay, he asks, thanks to the power of hindsight, games that were criticized at launch have later been looked back on as great games. Wind Waker springs to mind, most notably, and for some people even Final Fantasy 13. Do you think once all the content has been released for Final Fantasy 15 and it's complete, or as complete as they can make it, will people forget about its rocky launch and hold it in high regard?
Good.
That's tough to
question.
Say. I mean, I don't think people are going to forget it anytime soon. But actually, no. This is something Landon touched on in a video he made a couple weeks ago about memory. The longer something is in the past, the more positive things you remember about it.
Yeah.
You tend to sort of like forget. Well, in the video he touched on something a little bit different than that, but I think it's related. Is that the way memory works, you tend to forget.
You like repackage the memory, with your new context,
with new context, and a lot of times we hold on to positive things and forget about negative things. This has been true of me even recently with Xenogears. Like, I remember I was playing Xenogears and I was frustrated a lot of the time. But what do I remember of Xenogears? I remember, like, as time goes back and I remember it, I remember the themes. I remember a lot of the philosophy that was the inspiration for the game. I remember researching and, like, I remember a lot of the positive experience I had with the game, and I tend to forget a lot of the negative experience I had with the game. As more time goes on, I remember it more fondly than I actually enjoyed it while playing. I think because of that, say 20 years from now, Final Fantasy 15 might be remembered more fondly than it is currently viewed today. But do I think when the game is actually complete, next year, whenever development ends, people will go into and replay it then and forget all the things that they criticized 2 years ago or whatever. I don't know about that. People are stingy. They don't like to to let developers off the leash these days with that kind of thing.
You know what's even like kind of crazy? Like Final Fantasy 13 was actually got like pretty good critical reception when it came out. Mm-hmm. And Wind Waker as well. It was actually reviewed pretty highly. I know that the fans, the audience, there was quite a bit of backlash to Wind Waker and Final Fantasy 13 amongst fans of each of those respective series. But when you look back on the general perception from, well, I don't want to give too much weight to critics in general, but from those people, I guess, they actually were, those games were still liked pretty well. Final Fantasy 15 also, I believe it, for the most part, people were okay with it. People did like it. So if people end up coming back around, it's like it's not as big of a change as you would think, given that its Metacritic score is like 84, right? And it's like people are like, oh my gosh, this game's actually really good. It's like, well, it was an 84. Like, that's not a bad game for the most part. I mean, I don't want to give too much weight to the aggregate websites and critics and stuff, but I feel like we can remember people hating it more than they actually did hate it at the time.
Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Like, because, you know, I was thinking about that, you know, the fact that nostalgia is a thing, right?
Yeah.
You have, people will call it rose-tinted glasses. They look back on something more fondly, and then if you actually go back, it's like, oh, I forgot about this or that frustrating thing. Like, that happens, but maybe it's about what the experience as a whole was received like. So you can also remember things being a lot worse than they were because at the time it was like, oh, this experience was terrible. And so, like, over time, you seem to, like, laser focus on the parts of that experience that were terrible, and you start to assume that there was a lot more to it than that. And similarly with good experiences, maybe that's what it is. But then when you actually revisit it, you remember things that you'd forgotten, and it's like, oh, you know, that maybe it's not quite what I thought or whatever.
You know, I think, like, the discourse for any, like, piece of pop culture is, like, when the thing comes out, it's like you have a higher number of just typical gamers talking about like a game, for example. But then like when you go to like 10 years after a game came out, the people that are still online talking about that game aren't your average gamer. Like, they're people that are more critically minded, maybe more interested in making games themselves, a lot like people in our audience where it's like they want to dig down deep. And that's a different type of person on average than what the original population was. And so it's possible that some themes survive amongst those people that existed at the time amongst that same group. But because you had this other group mixed in, kind of the average or the greater discourse wasn't dominated by that perspective. And so as time goes on, it's like, I don't know. And so I think it can go in a negative and a positive way. You can have people still going back and watching Citizen Kane. People wouldn't do that if it wasn't talked about.
Yeah.
they wouldn't. But then you can have people talking about stuff that sucked. Probably in the same way, if it was sucked in a notable kind of way.
Well, I'm thinking of Quest 64, and I'm like, as time's gone by, I don't remember positive things about that experience. I remember that we were stoked to play it, and that we had fun sometimes playing it. But my memories of that game have not grown in fondness afterwards because it wasn't a good game to begin with.
Yeah, you remember. You remember specifically the bad things.
And so bad things get worse over time, and good things get better over time. Nothing stays in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. or like if something is, it tends to be, your experience with it was really negative, you'll remember it more negatively as time goes on. And if your experience is positive, you'll remember it more positively as time goes on.
And in that regard, Final Fantasy 15 offers a generally positive experience, which means were we to follow this, extrapolate the data, let's go out 10 years, it will likely be perceived as better than it is currently perceived because it's already on the good-ish end of the spectrum, right? It's not. I don't know. I don't know very many people who outright call it a bad game. The way that Quest 64 is a bad game, right?
Not equivalent, not equivalent to Quest 64, but I see a lot of people calling FF15 a bad game, and I think actually that it might have to do with what we're talking about, though, because I think when it was initially out, you didn't have people talking about this being the worst FF ever, or this made me think Final Fantasy 13 is great. I think that sentiment is like growing over time.
Really?
It's like I see more and more people saying it's at least Final Fantasy 13 was a complete game. I see that being
that's
everywhere
point.
now.
That's a critique on the video game industry in general right now.
That's not even... I think that's not even exclusive to like the Final Fantasy population, like the Star Wars people. Yeah. It's happening the same way. All of a sudden, people are going, "Oh, but the prequels were at least an original thing."
Yeah, same exact concept. Yep.
The real world building versus this derivative.
So, like, that makes me wonder though, because it's like those movies. I mean, for us kids, it was different, but like, people were not receiving those super positively at the time. They were like, wow, this is bad dialogue or whatever, and talking about how bad they were. But now, being a decade removed from that and these new ones coming out, you see similar sorts of things, or people are remembering that more fondly than what's here right now. And I just think that's so fascinating that you have people being like, oh, episode 7. I mean, again, and this is really hard to talk about. I think you're right, Lana, because there's anecdotal experience within certain communities that are not representative of like the normal person. I think the normal moviegoer, average person, loved Star Wars Episode 7.
More so than the prequels, probably.
Than the prequels.
Yeah.
But it's just so funny to me within like our sort of niche communities where we're really analyzing and discussing these things, that you see that sort of like hard trend away from where the prequels were just panned and they're the most awful thing ever. And now this movie that I would say overall is a better film. Even me, I'm looking back and saying things like that. All of a sudden, when there's something presented to me like this that has like a comparison, I'm remembering something I hated more fondly. And it's weird because that wasn't true a few years ago. So I had nothing good to remember. I don't know. I don't really know where my train of thought is going with this. Arcadian Genesis. He's a psychologist who watches our videos. Hit me up with some of your thoughts on how memory works like this, because it's crazy to me how like Press Start to Play is saying, hindsight can really change the way you look at something. And how is that affected when a new piece of medium within a franchise or something is introduced, and all of a sudden hindsight really changes even from the time right before that was released. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so weird.
It's like a grass is always greener kind of thing. You know, whatever you have now
isn't as good as what
you could have.
Yeah.
And I like on the Zelda subreddit the other day, there's someone who posted and got a lot of people agreeing with him. Lots of smart people, lots of people are saying that he said, can we all agree that Breath of the Wild is the best video game in the Zelda franchise, but not the best Zelda game? And all these people came across saying, oh man, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I think. I can't say that Breath. It's very weird. Very weird. But I think the point out of that was like, it doesn't have what I want in a Zelda game, but it has what I want in video games in general. So I was happy with it.
Right.
But I wanted some dungeons. I wanted some,
That might have been more of like a story versus gameplay critique, where like the gameplay is just top notch, but the story, maybe you enjoyed it more in Wind Waker or something like that. Like I could see maybe that.
So I say a similar thing.
That's a tipping point, though. What are you going to say, Mike?
I say a similar thing about Final Fantasy IX, though. Like, I will tell anyone to their face, Final Fantasy IX is the best Final Fantasy game. It's not my favorite Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a similar thing he's asking with that question on Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, and I think this is like a tipping point. This is a pivot point. Like, Breath of the Wild was overwhelmingly like positively received. But there were still people critical of it, like at the time, right?
Yeah.
And those people will keep talking about the game, and eventually, only those people will be the ones that will still be talking about the game. Will be so far in the future, but I do feel like people are going to look back. We're starting to pivot. A couple of years, people are going to be like, "Oh man, I love Breath of the Wild, but I wish they did this. I wish they did."
Oh, yeah.
There's already people saying, and this isn't the same, but there's already people saying Mario Odyssey is way, 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 way better than Breath of the Wild. I'm talking like Donald Trump this whole thing, but I've run across a lot of this is on Reddit.
Yeah.
Run across a lot of people saying Mario Odyssey is head and shoulders above Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was like great, but like this has really perfected like the whole truly having fun in a video game, and that's like a whole nother discussion. But I just think as time passes, there's a pivot of some kind that happens. You know what I mean? Like in communities, and pivot positive or pivot negative. I think that's where the underrated comes from, is the idea that like, oh, did we not appreciate this enough or whatever? Let's start appreciating it now, because nobody else is, and there's a hipsterism, I think, that goes along with that a little bit.
Yeah, hipsterism plays such a huge role, and that's why it freaking changes all the time. Like for a while, you'll hear that this game is the most overrated game in the franchise, and then that totally changes over the next 10 years. It's a totally different one. Like,
yeah, it's pretty dumb.
I mean, franchises that go for span decades, I suppose that's just going to be a given, right? It's going to be the same series of games that's been going since the 80s.
Yeah,
Final Fantasy, Legend of Zelda, Mario, whatever it is, you're going to have a crazy range of experiences people have had. Yeah.
So, are they adding more Final Fantasy 15 like cutscenes? I know they added a few cutscenes and some extra content to the game itself, but are they going to do more of that, or is this stuff, or is the stuff that we're talking about here is completing the game, the DLC, like Arden and all that stuff?
I think it's a little both. So I think he's talking about, well, because a lot of the DLCs were like missing portions of the game.
Yeah, are they still doing more of that?
I don't know if it's been announced necessarily, but I know they're toying with the idea of a second season pass. So there's definitely
but that's more DLC. That's
what I
mean.
But some of the episodes have hooked in.
Have inserted story content.
You can go do the DLC.
Yes.
Like during the
game? Oh.
Yes. So when you're playing through, if you're playing through the game, you get up to Chapter 13, which previously in the original version of the game was Noctis by himself going through the capital city of the Empire alone with the ring. That part everybody freaking panned and hated, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you're playing through that, you don't have to just go out to the menu to see the Gladio Ignis side of that story. You can actually switch over during the course of the game through the main game and see that side of it. Okay. So that's like an addition, an update, patch, whatever you want to call it, that they inserted into it later that sort of like completed in a way or gave you more information about what's going on that people had been confused about or felt was missing. Because like,
is that true? Ignis, or not Ignis, but like, what's the other guy's name?
Gladio.
The other dude.
Prompto.
Oh, Prompto.
Is that true? Prompto too, when he like the train thing happens and all that.
Yeah, so he falls off the train.
Can you then play his thing?
And that's what that Prompto DLC is. Okay, it's that whole story of how he ended up meeting back up.
But you can play that during the game.
Oh, actually, I don't know about that.
It happens.
I don't know about that. I actually think that you cannot do that. I think you have to go through a separate menu to do that. But the scenes that they have put into the game, like there's a whole section that's different now. On the train where Noctis and kind of like talks to Shiva on the train. Yeah, she goes in this entire spiel now about like explaining the background with the Astrals and Ifrit and stuff. So I guess that is part of the main game now.
That's what I'm talking about. Like they've added some things to the main game. Is that what he's referring to as completing it, or is he referring to the extra DLC episode Prompto, episode Ignis, episode Gladio as making it a complete game?
I guess you'd have to ask him. I guess the way I read it was both.
Because I would say that, like, the game is the game. Like, even if you put DLC, like, an extra 3 hours of Prompto, like, if it's not in stride and in the
the core
flow
experience.
of the game, if it's not part of the game, if it's like, oh, you just beat the game and this whole thing happens and the climax already happened and you fell to a resolution and then you go play episode prompto, that doesn't do it. Like that's not the kind of thing where people are going to go back and play the game and have this wonderful experience. It needs to be integrated into the game in order for the game to be seen as a complete game. In my opinion, if this stuff should have been in the game, then you and if that's what's completing the game, as you know, he's possibly referring to, unless he's just talking about the extra cutscenes, which is fine. That helps complete things as well. I guess it depends on what he's referring to when he says that. But if he's also
I'm actually
DLC episode, I would disagree that that's completing the game in any way. It's like Banjo-Tooie. It's like adding a second game to play after you beat the game we're talking about, because it has its own character arc, its own resolution and climax, its own like deal that is anticlimactic if you're going to say that that's part of Final Fantasy 15 and you just play it afterwards or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally follow your line of thinking there.
Okay.
I actually don't know, because I'm actually waiting for the most part to, like, I'm probably going to finish the Prompto DLC and the Ignis when it comes out. But aside from that, I'm kind of staying away from starting the game over and playing it through again, because I want to see if it's going to be different and if it's going to feel more complete.
And then like you'll play it again after
a new game.
That.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So when they say production is over, development is done, this is the very last thing. Thank you so much. We're moving on to a new game now. When that happens, I will start a new file on Final Fantasy 15 and see how different it is from the original experience. And then I'll be able to answer that question for you.
Okay.
I don't know, because I mean, there's so many things they've added into it, you know, post-release, like chapter select and all kinds of stuff that it's like, I don't know, maybe you can. Maybe when it's all said and done, they will have a way for you to, like, say, yeah, Prompto fell off the train. Are you going to follow that now? Yes. And then you just play through that, and you just go all the way through it, and you don't have to exit a menu to go into something else. I wonder how tough that is to do. It might not be feasible.
Yeah, that may not work well.
I know that they've also, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe they're just thinking about doing this, or they're close to doing this, or they have. I think they have added, like, to the vehicle the ability to go off-road.
Oh, really?
So, like, that's a whole part of the game now, where you can upgrade the vehicle so that you can drive off, like, into the freaking... And that was, like, something Tabata wanted to do from the beginning.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
That's something he wanted to do from the beginning, was have the freedom to take the vehicle off-road. So, like, that's in there now. That changes things tremendously. Holy crap.
Yeah.
In terms of traveling, you know? Like, so I have a feeling that the game, whether or not it will allow you to play the DLC episodes in stride or not, will still feel really quite different by the time they're done developing it. But I do agree that if that's not an option, to switch over to those DLC episodes while in the course of the story, that's going to be disappointing to some degree.
Yeah, that it can't be considered part of the complete game, in my opinion.
Sure.
Dude, this game came out almost a year ago.
Yeah, soon.
Yeah, we're getting very close to 1 year. Yep.
Coming up on that.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to be talking about it. Like, we knew we would still be talking about it, but it's weird to be, like, still looking forward to Final Fantasy 15.
Totally.
Like,
that was one of, like, the funnest times on this channel, was the days and weeks and months leading up to Final Fantasy 15.
Yep.
That was good.
Had a lot of good discussions, a lot of new people coming in.
Yeah.
It's a good time. I mean, we streamed it for like a week straight every single day.
Yep.
For hours and hours on end. All right, guys, that's the end of our podcast today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone who submitted your questions. Continue to do so. If you are one of our patrons, that's where we go first. Make sure to submit on Patreon your questions, and we'll source from that first. If you're on our Discord, go to our podcast channel on Discord, ask your questions there, or ask them in the comments on the video here, and we'll get to them next time. If you're listening to this audio only, please go ahead and take a look at our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/ wait, what is it? Okay, there's two different ones. So one is youtube.com/WarioLasky plays.
Yes.
Which will take you to Dark Pixel Gaming. Or you could go youtube.com/c/Dark Pixel Gaming. And that one makes more sense. Either one will get you there. Check it out. Got Final Fantasy 13 discussions going on right now. By the way, just want to have a huge shout out to everybody who's participating in that. Blowing my expectations out of the water with your amicable nature.
Nice.
I thought that was going to be so contentious. I thought that there was going to be fighting like crazy in the comments. And people have been so patient and like just open about disagreement. You guys are blowing my mind. If that continues for the next couple episodes, I will for sure add 2 more to that list. So I'll do a video on graphics and animation, and I'll do a video on music. If you guys keep that up, I'm really proud of everybody for being nice to each other on a game that is so divisive. So,
yeah.
Anyways, video will come on Thursday where we talk about character development. So see you guys then, and have a nice day. Peace out.
See ya.
Peace.